that physical lots of evidence that physical activity is a health promoting thing to do. It's worthwhile. And good nutrition messaging evolves with time. So this is actually the very first Canada Food Guide from 1942. It was called Food Rules then. So we have come a long way in how strict and rigid the recommendations are. I just thought this was really cool. And it's also funny because it says right on here, eat right, feel right, as if it's that simple. So I thought it was very fitting for this presentation. So all of these things that I just discussed, they're all evidence-based, they're all true, but as we know, multiple things can be true at the same time. So what about the not so good nutrition messaging? One thing that is really common to believe and to hear in our culture is weight and health being conflated as one thing. So we automatically think weight loss is good, it means you're healthier. Weight gain is bad, it means you're less healthy. And that kind of goes into the next one here of if you eat healthy, you will lose weight. That's just not true. I mean, everyone in the world could eat the same things. We could all move our bodies the exact same amount and body diversity would still exist. There would still be thin people, there would still be fat people. It's not just a matter of what you eat and how you move your body. And another thing that I see a lot is how black and white the idea of healthy eating is. When you think about diet, you're either on the wagon or you're off the wagon. A food is either good or it's bad. And that kind of ties into the idea that there is one right way to eat. And in North America, I feel like our picture of health is, smoothies, quinoa bowls, salads, so foods like that. But that is very, very exclusive to the many different cultures that exist here in Canada and across the world. And to think that there is just one way to eat it's just kind of ignorant when you think of all the different cultures that have been eating their traditional foods for centuries. There can't just be one way to eat. So that was the good and the bad. Now let's talk about the confusing, because nutrition messaging is very confusing and it can be very contradictory. So lots of these that I pulled are things I see on social media, but mainstream media promotes these things too. I've seen it in like newspapers, the news. So the first one is eat whole unprocessed foods, but also buy these supplements and shakes. So the contradiction there is that supplements and shakes would obviously be very highly processed things. Sugar is the worst thing for you, but juice cleanses are the best thing for you. Juice is incredibly high in sugar. That just doesn't make sense. Keto is the best way to eat, but if that doesn't work, try plant-based. So keto, for those of you who don't know, is a very high-fat diet, and it's usually reliant on a lot of animal products like meat, cheese, eggs. Plant-based is the exact opposite. It's very high carb, and it relies solely on plant-based foods. And I see both of these diets promoted a lot, probably the same amount, but it's just interesting because again, it's so black and white. Those are two completely opposite ends of the diet spectrum. This one's my favorite. Avoid all chemicals in your food, even though all food is made up entirely of chemicals. So everything I've ever eaten in my life, it's all made up of chemicals. I think it is human nature to fear what we don't understand. So it makes sense that when we read a label and we see a big scary word, we think we shouldn't eat it. I'm sure many of you have heard the saying, if your grandma doesn't know what it is, don't eat it. Or if you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. That's not true. Just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean that it's not safe. Just because you don't know what it does doesn't mean that it's unhealthy for you. So the reason things get so confusing with nutrition messaging is because so much of nutrition has been co-opted by diet culture. So diet culture involves the diet industry, of course. So that's anyone, like Weight Watchers, anyone who sells diet pills, who sells diet books, gyms, those like workout programs, Beachbody, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not just that. It's also the messages that we are bombarded with every single day. And most of us, I think, have internalized these messages, and it's become part of our belief system. So let's take a look at some of the lies that diet culture tells us. First one is that your worth is tied to your weight. So this is where the thin ideal comes from. It is just generally accepted that thin is better. We all want to be thin. Fat phobia is our deeply ingrained fear of fatness. It's also our discomfort with fatness. Weight bias, that's the assumptions we make about people based on their size. And then systemic oppression of people in larger bodies. So with the thin ideal comes thin privilege. And it's not something most of us think about. I know I sure didn't before the concept was introduced to me, but the world is really made for straight-sized people. As someone with thin privilege, I can go to a restaurant and easily fit in any booth. There's always clothing available in my size. I fit in airplane seats. Nothing is made difficult for me. If I go to the doctor with a sore elbow or a sore knee, I get that issue treated. I'm not just told to lose weight. So another one is you are not good enough the way you are. So there's this message that you should be actively trying to modify yourself at all times, whether that is, eat better or move more, lose weight, get stronger, whatever it is. You should always be trying to do something. And then it's your fault when your attempts to do this fail. So diet culture is pretty smart, actually. They kind of have their bases covered because they just blame it on you when it doesn't work. And the last one, this is my favorite. Losing weight is simple. It's just calories in and out. If you can't lose weight, you must lack willpower. If you were thinner, you wouldn't have any health issues, and you will be happier when you lose weight. Diet culture is really great at gaslighting you. It's very manipulative, and you're always going to be the one to blame at the end of the day. So with all of these messages, and I'm telling you here, these are lies. This is not the truth. So it kind of leaves us with the question of, well, what is the truth? And also, how do these messages affect people? Because it has to, right? Like I said, we internalize a lot of this. So I have some stats here. 81% of 10-year-olds are afraid of being fat. That is a stat from 1996. I can't even imagine what that number is now. Weight stigma is a significant risk factor for depression, low self-esteem, and body dissatisfaction. 95% of dieters regain their lost weight within 5 years, or in other words, 95% of diets fail. We don't actually have an effective, safe, and sustainable way for people to lose weight. If we did, people wouldn't still be dieting, right? Dieting is the most important predictor of developing an eating disorder. That was a study done in 14 and 15-year-olds. 79% of weight loss program participants cope with weight stigma by eating more food. So much of the messaging around weight loss is shame-based. And what we know about food is that food is comforting, right? We all talk about emotional eating. I'm sure we've all gone to food for comfort at some point in our lives. And I don't know what we expect when we try to shame people into losing weight, because when you are shamed, you require comfort. Food is easy comfort. Black, Indigenous, and people of color are half as likely to be diagnosed and treated for an eating disorder. And transgender college students experience disordered eating at 4 times the rate of their cisgender peers. So these two stats I wanted to put beside each other because it just shows that all different forms of oppression are linked. And in this case, if you do not fit the thin, white, cis ideal, diet culture is going to hit you even harder. This last one is really, really important. Less than 6% of people with a diagnosed eating disorder in the US are medically underweight. So that means 94% of people with an eating disorder, you can't tell by looking at them. So that would mean they are considered a healthy weight, overweight, or obese. So that's a really important thing to remember, because I think we have this image in our head of what eating disorders look like, and it is usually thin white women, and that's just not the case. So let's talk about the food relationship spectrum. With diet culture liking things to be so black and white, if things were black and white, we would have on one end here an intuitive eater, and on the other end, we'd have the diagnosed eating disorders. That would be the only two things. So an intuitive eater is somebody who allows themselves to eat when they're hungry, enjoys their food, finds satisfaction in their food choices, does not exclude any foods, chooses things they actually like. There's no contempt or hatred for their body. In general, they don't think about food that much. It's kind of just a background noise sort of thing. With a diagnosed eating disorder, there are different eating disorders, each with pretty specific diagnostic criteria. So a lot of people don't actually meet these criteria, so they don't end up with a diagnosis. So then they're basically told, you're fine. But there's a lot of gray. So what does that gray look like? So this is not to scale. This isn't, properly spaced out or anything, but these are some of the forms of disordered eating that I see the most. So labeling foods as good or bad, body or weight preoccupation, macro or calorie counting, yo-yo dieting, avoiding entire food groups. Carbs are often the main one to be avoided there. Binge eating, fasting, or skipping meals. There's a lot more examples of disordered eating, but like I said, these are just the ones I see the most often. Okay, so when we talk about disordered eating, people are probably wondering, well, how do I know if I have disordered eating or if somebody I love has disordered eating? So there's three things we look for to assess. The first one is behavior. You want to look at the quantity of food eaten. So is somebody eating abnormally small or abnormally large amounts of food? Are there any purging or compensatory behaviors like throwing up, using laxatives, over-exercising? Is there an avoidance of certain foods? What are their exercise habits like? And then what kind of language do they use around food or body? Is it very self-deprecating, very negative? Those are just a few examples. The next thing is obsession. So how much energy does this use up for that person? Thinking about food, thinking about exercise. Are they able to focus on other things in their life? And is there a lot of anxiety around the thoughts of food or the thoughts of body? The last one is functionality. So are you able to function at a normal capacity for you? That's going to depend on the individual. But what's your social function like? Are you able to go out and eat with friends? Are you able to go to a birthday party and enjoy a slice of cake? What's your ability to complete tasks like? For example, can you go to work? Can you get your work done? Do you have the attention span to do your homework? Do you have the energy to do your homework? And then of course, flexibility or rigidity in someone's habits. So that's looking back at those behaviors and seeing how rigid those things are. Of course, the more rigid it is, the less functional that would be. Last thing I want to point out here is that undiagnosed does not mean unproblematic. So if you resonate with any of these things, or if anything on that spectrum, you were kind of like, yeah, I experienced that, or wherever you fall on that spectrum, there are mental, physical, and emotional consequences to that. Everyone is deserving of help. You do not need to be, extremely sick to have support with your eating or with your food relationship. So on that happy note, how does somebody build a healthier relationship with food and body? Because clearly we're being bombarded with all of these things that make it really difficult. First thing would be to expand your definition of health. I think we put a lot of emphasis on nutrition and exercise, which of course are important, but those are just two pieces of the puzzle. So health includes physical, mental, emotional, and social well-being. So if you're going to make a change to something, just for example, say exercise or nutrition, you have to look at how that is going to affect these other aspects of your well-being. Because again, in order to improve health as a whole, we can't be sacrificing one of these for another. Second one is recognize the role of the social determinants of health. So that would be things like income, race, your access to food, your access to healthcare, etc. The social determinants of health are a much bigger player in the game than, you know, personal food choices or something. That's not to say that people don't have the ability to make health promoting decisions, but the big things, they weigh more in this situation. They have a way bigger impact. And then lastly, even just the definition of healthy eating needs to be expanded, because I think we have, again, this black and white idea of what healthy eating is, but it is imperfect. True healthy eating is imperfect. If somebody had a diet, if somebody came to me and had a diet of just nutritious foods, in, you know, the portions that people perceive as quote unquote healthy, I would red flags everywhere. I would think that there's something disordered going on there. Healthy eating should include nutritious and non-nutritious foods, so our fun foods as well. This next one, use neutral language around food and body. So it might seem like a small thing, but the language we use affects how we feel, it affects our thoughts, and it can affect our actions. So one thing to remember is that food has no moral value. It is neutral. So we need to avoid using good or bad to describe foods, or clean, like clean eating, dirty foods. Because that reflects back on the person eating it, right? If I say, oh, like this burger is so bad for me, then that makes me bad. That makes me a bad person for eating it. We also have to think about people who are lower income. They rely on a lot of these foods that we deem, you know, junk food or bad for you foods. So what does that say about those people that have to rely on these foods for sustenance? This one's kind of a doozy, so stick with me. Behaviors, habits, and thought patterns can be healthy or unhealthy, but a single food cannot. So in order to determine if something is healthy or if it's unhealthy, you need the context behind it. So I'll give you an example. A cupcake at a birthday party. So a cupcake's not very nutritious. It gives you some carbs and some fat, but there's not a lot of nutrients in there. But if I were to go to a birthday party with my family, say, and I were to be able to eat a cupcake with my parents, socialize, enjoy that cupcake, feel no guilt about it after, and then move on with my life, that was a really healthy choice that I made. It doesn't mean the cupcake is nutritious, but that was healthy in that moment. On the contrary, fruits and vegetables are foods that we generally see as healthy. But if somebody is only eating fruits and vegetables out of fear of weight gain or fear of carbs or fear of fat, whatever it is, that's incredibly unhealthy. So we really can't say that a food is healthy or unhealthy without looking at the relationship to that food and the context in which it is being consumed. So you're probably like, okay, well, if I can't say those things anymore, how am I supposed to talk about food? We want to use more neutral or positive terms like nutritious or nourishing foods instead of healthy, or fun foods instead of like junk food or bad food. Because really, they are fun. Like, who doesn't love a cupcake? And then lastly, all foods are important and serve different purposes. So of course, food is fuel. I think we hear that a lot too. It's nourishment for sure, but it's also comfort. It's also culture. It's also our social life a lot of the time. And it's pleasurable. It's meant to be enjoyed, right? So we need food to meet all of those needs. So that doesn't mean that one kind of food is better than the other. We need all of them because we have all of those needs that food is meant to meet for us. Next one is get curious about food beliefs. So first of all, what are your food beliefs? Do you fear any foods? Do you believe that you shouldn't be eating certain things? Do you believe that at a certain time at night, you're no longer allowed to eat things? You know, like really start digging about, well, what do I believe in? And then start asking, well, why do I think that? What experiences have shaped those beliefs? I usually get my clients to dig all the way back to childhood and think about what kind of foods did I eat with my family? Was there diet talk in the house, like at the dinner table? Were my parents on diets? Did people make comments about my body? And then, of course, as an adult too, all of your experiences will shape your food beliefs. And then you have to question, are these beliefs true? Like, where did I hear this from? Do I have evidence for that? Do I have evidence against it? And then lastly, you have to think, okay, is that belief serving me? Is this thought pattern serving me? Because if it ends up with you being extremely anxious or afraid of food, or feeling like you need to burn it off, or feeling like your body is not good enough, it might be worth throwing those beliefs out and discovering some new ones. Then the last one I have for you is think critically about nutrition messaging. That is harder to do than it sounds. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things to look for. The first one is look at the expertise of the person sharing. So I'm going to use social media as an example for this, but it can apply to pretty much anything. So is this person an expert in their field? Have they studied this? Do they have evidence for this? And then looking at the application to your life. So if, Joe Blow on Instagram did this diet and this was his outcome and he's super happy, okay, just because it works for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for me. How would that be practical in my life? Do I want that kind of food relationship? How am I going to feel when the weight comes back? These are all questions you have to ask yourself. And then another thing is this message influenced by diet culture? Chances are it is. I think most messages are. But then also ask yourself, is the person sharing this message maybe struggling with their own food relationship or their own relationship with their body? Because, and it's not to point fingers, we're all victims of diet culture, but it's good to just know where a person is coming from, or to at least consider where a person might be coming from, because it's very common for us to project our own feelings about ourselves onto others. And I see that happening a lot on Instagram. And then lastly, let go of obligation. So just because, your friend or your teammate is eating clean or, going on a diet or starting this new exercise routine, it does not mean you have to do it as well. One thing that diet culture or wellness culture has going for it is that it incites competition between people. And there's this idea that if you're not trying, if you're not doing the things that everyone else is doing, then you're failing somehow. So letting go of that obligation to, try all these things or try to change yourself, it can be really freeing. So eating doesn't have to be so hard, and it really shouldn't be. It should be something that you enjoy. It should not be bringing anxiety, shame, fear, guilt into your life. So I really encourage everyone, if any of this has resonated with you, to check your benefits and see if you are covered for registered dietitian services. A lot of people are. I also believe that if you are a student, you are covered under your parents' insurance up until the age of 25, I think. So that's also something worth looking into. And this is where you can find more information. So we are on Facebook at Food to Fit Nutrition Inc. I am on Instagram as Sid the Dietitian. We are also, Food to Fit has its own page there. And then you can contact me both through the website, foodtofit.ca, or you can email me directly at Sidney@foodtofit.ca. That's it.
Awesome, thank you. So we have some questions here, so I'll just ask you them one at a time, and then you can choose however you want to answer them. So the first question is being aware of calories and macros always negative?
Well, again, we have to look at those factors that we talked about with testing for disordered eating. So not everyone who is aware of calories or is aware of macros is going to be doing that in a disordered way. It depends how much energy it is taking up for you. It depends how much stress or how rigid you are with the, again, I think the word used was awareness, but usually there's some form of counting or tracking. I do believe that it is hard to have a really free and purely positive relationship with food when you're trying to micromanage your intake, but I don't think it's always super problematic.
Perfect. Okay, our next question is, can you address in more detail about falling off the wagon when trying to lose weight? And then just as a note, it says, I think this is a struggle for many people.
Yes, it literally happens to everyone. So the diets, the genius marketing of diets is that they are set up to fail. They are always, almost always, way too restrictive so that a person cannot stick to it for very long. And then again, like I said, they have their bases covered, because when you fall off the wagon, it's your fault because you just lack willpower. But what happens physiologically is when we restrict our intake, our brain starts sending more and more signals to be like, eat, please eat. So that can come in the form of really intense like feelings of hunger, really intense cravings for food, food thoughts, you know, constantly just floating around in your head. So biologically, we are programmed to, you know, keep weight on. So it's not a matter of willpower. Anyone who has fallen off the wagon, they usually have these feelings of being very out of control. And it's because our primal brain is sort of taking over there.
Thank you. All right, so our next question is, if I notice disordered eating habits in one of my friends, what can I do or say to help them without being too preachy?
That's a really tough one. I think just having, you know, an open kind of conversation about it, you can always start kind of small. Like, you don't need to have an intervention right off the hop, but just maybe starting to question, like, oh, like I noticed this, like, can you tell me why you did that? Or, you know, just really approaching it from a place of caring or a place of love, and offering support, offering help. Like, I can help you find a dietitian, or I can help you find a therapist if you want, but ultimately it has to be their decision. So you can express your concerns, but you know, you can't really expect anything from them, because people won't accept help until they're ready.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we have a question. It says, what do you recommend in terms of navigating doctors who only focus on weight? And then just as some context, they said, going as far as telling you to do keto, it may have happened to me today, with a sad face.
Today, ooh, that is fresh. Yes, that is weight stigma, that is weight bias. Like, that is exactly what it is. It's important to remember that while doctors have a ton of specialized knowledge in medicine, they don't receive a ton of nutrition training. It's really difficult to find a doctor who uses a health at every size approach or a non-diet approach. I'm still trying to put a list together for Regina. I know of some practitioners in Saskatoon. So whoever this person is, if you want to shoot me an email, I'd be happy to share those names with you. But really, like, advocating for yourself. It's so uncomfortable and it's so difficult, but find a different doctor. If you're not getting the care that you need, or you're being told just to lose weight or just to diet, and your actual medical needs are not being met, it's okay to, you know, advocate and then switch doctors if they're not gonna help you out.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is, will the slides and recording be emailed out? So I'll start that question, and Sidney, if you want to add, you can add to it. So we will email out a link to where you can find the recording. We're still not sure if the best place to put it will be on our website or on our YouTube channel, but eventually the recording will be available. I will take the blame. I forgot to press record right away, so it's missing the first like 5 minutes. That's on me. And if Sidney shares her slides, we'll share those as well, but that's completely up to her.
Yeah, I think probably, I feel like the slides are pretty bare bones for the most part, so I think it would be better just to have the report.
Yeah, for sure, I agree. Awesome. Okay, our next question is, what advice can you give someone who limits eating fun foods for the reason that it may cause chronic diseases?
Okay, so I'm assuming this is referring to things like diabetes or heart disease and, you know, wanting to prioritize your nutrition. And there's nothing wrong with that. The kind of framework that I use with counseling is the intuitive eating framework, and it's based on 10 principles, one of which is gentle nutrition. So I would say with fun foods and that fear or that concern about chronic disease, I always like to use the lens of adding in rather than taking out. So a person can eat dessert every day and be healthy, as long as we're still including that variety and that balance that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So instead of thinking, what sugar can I cut out to avoid diabetes? You could think, well, what fiber sources could I add in to, you know, help protect me?
Okay. This next question has a bit of context before it. So it says, you seem to know a lot about weight. I have a friend that often asks me, do you think I'm fat? And I reply, no. And then she says, you're lying. It's like a trap for me. What should I say the next time she asks me this?
Ooh, yep, that is a trap for sure. So the word fat is actually very interesting. Most people see it as an insult because of the fat phobia in our culture, in our society. The fat reclamation movement was started by fat people, and it was to kind of take back that word. So in the non-diet world, in the health at every size world, we actually use the word fat just as a neutral descriptor. So, I mean, I don't know if this person is fat or if this person is straight sized or what, but maybe in that situation, it's a weird situation. But I mean, like, if they are fat, then yeah, you're fat, and you're also funny and smart and hilarious, and, you know, like, that's such an unimportant part of your friend. And I assume you're not friends with them because of what they look like. It's a big conversation to get into, but yeah, that is a trap. I mean, if they see it as a negative thing, then it will be insulting. But the truth is, it's a neutral term. It's just a descriptor like tall or short.
For sure. Do you believe there is a healthy way to lose weight?
The only healthy way to lose weight is if it is an outcome of fixing your food relationship. So if you were to go into counseling or start seeing a dietitian to start creating some healthy habits, to create a more positive relationship with food, and then if weight loss was an outcome of that, then that's great. That means that the weight you're at now is your healthy, happy weight, and that's awesome. But weight loss is not guaranteed when you start creating healthy habits, when you start addressing that food relationship piece. Whatever your body does as an outcome of that, that is your healthy weight.
Okay, we just have a couple more short ones here. What made you choose to be a dietitian?
I actually struggled with disordered eating very intensely before I applied to nutrition. I had no idea what a dietitian did. I just wanted to be the healthiest person in the whole wide world. So it really was a place of disordered eating and thinking and ignorance. I had no idea what a dietitian did. But then over the course of my education, I, of course, came to terms with the fact that I had very disordered eating. And now the reason I want to be a dietitian is to help people that were in the same boat as I was.
Awesome. Okay. When I intuitively eat, I just end up binging. How do we stop binging without restricting foods that trigger binges? And then just as some motivation for this, they say, I want to stop binging because it makes me sick.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, binging is a thing I actually see a lot. Most of my clients do have some level of binging, and there are different drivers of binging. So when you say you're eating intuitively, that sounds like you're allowing all foods in your diet. But I would want to know, is there any form of mental restriction still going on? Are you still classifying foods as good or bad? Are you still telling yourself, I need to binging, I need to lose weight, I need to whatever it is? Because that alone, that mental restriction, is enough to cause binge eating.
Perfect. Okay, and last question is just a question from me. I want to know, what your favorite fun food is.
Oh, ooh. I've been really into donuts lately.
There's some good donuts in the
Yeah,
city.
from Tangerine. Every Friday, I'll go and get one. And I put it in my phone and it's like a thing. Like I have to go do it. Because if I miss it, I'm like, oh, now I have to wait another week.
Fair. Okay, we have one more question that snuck in here.
Okay.
Do you find that other dietitians agree with you on what you tell clients, or do they fall into diet traps too?
Oh, yes, definitely. Lots of dietitians still fall into diet traps. It's really interesting, actually, because obviously I'm supportive of my profession, but people have different approaches to things. And I think a lot of dietitians still do use a very, what we call weight normative lens to health. So that's, like the weight focus on calories, that kind of thing. So yeah, there are definitely lots of dietitians who still use that sort of framework. My recommendation is if you are looking for a dietitian and you're wanting to work on whether it's disordered eating disorders, or healing that relationship with food or body, that you look for the term non-diet dietitian, or HAES, which is HAES, health at every size. That will tell you that they use the same framework that I do.
Perfect. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much for sharing. We have definitely, we have one. Okay, I swear this is our last question, and then I'm cutting it off. Okay, we have a question. It says, one more question. Is there a nursing nutritious career out there?
Sorry, say that again.
Is there a nursing/nutrition career out there?
Oh, like combining the two?
Yeah, so maybe like a specific placement or something that you can talk about?
The thing that comes to mind would be like a health educator, because that would have a lot to do with like diabetes or, chronic disease, and lots of nurses end up being health educators. But other than that, maybe any kind of outpatient clinic, or maybe like public health. You could somehow get into the nutrition realm of things, but it's a great question. I don't really have a good answer for that one.
Yeah, and there is some dietitians that, of course, work in hospitals and things like that.
Oh, too. Yes, of course, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sidney. We really appreciated it. For everybody who's on the call, thank you for attending. We really appreciate you coming and supporting and attending and learning with us. If you're interested, we still have some Revive and Thrive events happening in March. So we'll have some that focus on reflection, gratitude, sleep, meditation, yoga, things like that. All things that do contribute to all those dimensions of health that Sidney was talking about before. So you can follow Sidney on social media. She posts amazing stuff. She is what inspired me to get her to come here. And please follow the You Are All Connected account as well for more information on Revive and Thrive. But I think that's it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
You can stop the recording.